Hello, London. Welcome to the Manish Tiwari show. This afternoon, we have someone with us who's a very distinguished educator who has also been for a very, very long period with a global organization called Amnesty International. Most of you would have heard of the organization. As one has said, it has been at the forefront of human rights activism, standing up for the weak and the vulnerable and minorities across the world. He right now lectures at the Essex University. His name is Abbas Faiz. And please welcome me in joining him today, this afternoon, at the Manish Tiwari show. Abbas, are you there?
Yes, I am there. Thank you very much, Manish.
Thanks a lot, Abbas, for being here.
It's an honor to be in your show.
Thank you so much. Now, coming back to you, Abbas, before we start the show, I just wanted to give the viewers a brief synopsis of your spectacular work in the field of human rights. You've been there for 30 years. You were a senior researcher. You left the organization in 2016. And since then, you've been teaching at the Essex University in this particular kind of stream, which we call human rights, which in my view is one of the most important and very, very significant fields for a modern democracy to survive and thrive. Places where democracies have not been able to kind of succeed, at least in a sustainable way. And we know a lot of countries where that is the case, where we do see always a tussle between different forces, whether it be the religious forces or the army, and democracy is almost threatened. And in those countries, what we find, the first thing which gets abused is human rights. There is no proper way to channelize the rights of each and every individual. The constitution in those countries doesn't get upheld. Now, coming back to you, Abbas, since you've been kind of working in this space, today we see a new kind of threat. Till yesterday, we had a threat in a very different way. We would talk about third world countries. We'd talk about certain countries in Africa and Asia where things were not so normal, where, as per the Western standards, we were facing what we call a human rights abuse. But today, for the first time, globally, we see a certain situation wherein the most advanced democracies, where, countries like America, United States, countries in Europe, for the first time, the spotlight is not just on the third world countries, the spotlight is also on them. We have a certain kind of ultra-right-wing nationalism taking over, and there is a debate whether we need to accord the same rights to every single individual, where we can afford to give every single individual the same kind of decorum which we afford to the majority. And again, there's an unprecedented sense of crisis in certain ways, where even organizations like Amnesty International are under the scanner. They are no more the sacrosanct human rights institution which we believe they were. So what are your views on this, Abbas?
Yeah, I mean, you have touched upon a number of very, very important areas. I agree with you entirely that there is a serious threat against human rights. And this threat is not just coming from kind of countries that you mentioned as third world countries, but also from the first world countries, from the second world countries. I have my own views, Manish, on this. And if you allow me, I will actually detail those views.
Yeah.
I do not actually believe, I do not divide people into left and right and religious or secular anymore. I used to be able to do that maybe many, many years ago. But since then, having worked with Amnesty for about 30 years, having worked on really kind of opposing repression and human rights violations in many different countries of the world, I've come to see that really the world is not divided into left or right or religious or secular. The world is actually divided, the peoples of the world are divided into two types of people. There are only two types in my perspective. those who want to expand the scope for freedoms, which is democracy, human rights, all of those. And those who want to actually limit the scope for freedoms.
Yeah.
And these two types of people, they can be anywhere. They can be in South Asia, they can be in the United States, they can be anywhere in the world. In the United States, there are people who want to limit the scope for freedoms, not just in their own country, but also in other parts of the world. At the same time, there are also people in the United States who want to widen the scope for freedoms, not just in the United States, but also in other parts of the world. And if we look at everywhere in the world, every single country that you can think of, we can see that people with whom, as you and I, as human rights defenders, with whom we can associate, as people with whom we agree, and there are people in those countries with whom we cannot agree because they are supporting human rights violations, human rights abuses. I think human rights belong to everyone, and if we look at it like that, we will feel a sense of global solidarity. Because what has happened is that with neo-globalism, the kind of expansion of free market, the gap, the inequality gap, has become a lot wider than before. And it doesn't matter where you are, that inequality gap exists. So we can feel solidarity with those people who are at the receiving end of human rights issues, at the receiving end of human rights violations, and we can actually oppose the policies, the structures, the the kind of strategies that some governments are using to suppress people. So I thought, I would actually explain my position like that.
Yeah, I think that's clear to me. I mean, yes, there are people everywhere in the globe, but the foundation of a democratic structure, which we want the world, I mean, most of us want the world to be a democracy where, everyone is respected. That's the foundation of the enlightened world, or the world as we know since the time we have grown or we came into this world. We had this huge sense of optimism. The world wars were behind us. The darker chapters of human history, as we know, were much behind us. The dark ages were behind us. Yeah, sure. There's a call coming. We can take this call. Yeah, no problem. Hello?
Hi, the show is going on. I mean, I'm quite liking the show.
Yeah.
I just have a question that India has banned Amnesty International. So do you think that the intolerance level in India has increased a lot, and that is the reason Amnesty, the organization like Amnesty, being banned?
I was going to come to this very important question, and I am very aware that Indian government decided to freeze the account of Amnesty International, and that happened the last 6 months. There is a certain amount of, as we all know, there's a government which is the Narendra Modi government, which believes in a certain kind of ideological slant. Without going into the good or bad of it, what we have seen is that there is an increased pressure from the government on NGOs and organizations which have been operating in India with overseas funding. And at the receiving end have been number of NGOs. The most prominent ones which have been targeted in the past include Greenpeace, which in my view was absolutely kind of sacrilegious. I mean, what can you expect Greenpeace to do but only protect nature and environment? And the second most prominent one, which has been Amnesty International. I did go through the statements before, today morning, and I found that Avinash Kumar, who heads Amnesty International India, has had a vociferous attack on the government's policies in trying to curb human rights and freedom in India by targeting someone like Amnesty International. And the government, on the other hand, the Indian government has stated that although Amnesty International is kind of pretending to talk to the powers to be and standing up for human rights, but there have been serious lapses in its conduct. Now, we don't know what the truth is. I mean, but as we all are aware, Amnesty International has a track record. It's kind of difficult to imagine what it would do so bad. You know, what could it be doing? I mean, why would it be doing money laundering, and why it would be taking money to India when we all are aware that there are various ways to do that? You know, I mean, the Hawala system, the Hundi system, or whatever you call it, they're still very much alive. I mean, why would someone like Amnesty International do that? So there seems to be, in my view, a suspicion on the government's intent. However, I'd like to invite Abbas to put his views on this.
I'm really disappointed because, I mean, I do not work with Amnesty anymore. I have worked with Amnesty in the past. So I'm very disappointed. Disappointed not just because the government of India is attacking Amnesty, but in my opinion, by doing that, the government of India is attacking all human rights defenders in South Asia. Because if you keep saying that, you know, South Asian countries are important, people in South Asia are important, and we know that they are important because I consider myself to be really part of South Asia. So they are important. We are all very important people. But if you keep saying that, and then at the same time, you're trying to actually kind of somehow indicate that, no, these people are not important. I am the government of India. I can do whatever I want. I can actually, you know, kind of ban Amnesty International. I can impose restrictions on the work of a very reputable human rights organization. I can accuse them of money laundering. These accusations, this type of, you know, actually response to a human rights organization is not just an attack on that particular organization alone. I think it is an attack on the hopes and aspirations that many people have in South Asia. And I have a reason why I say that. Because, you know, India is allowing itself to lose that high moral grounds that really, you know, by history, by the kind of history of fight against, you know, imperialism, by the history of fight against colonialism, it was gaining. I mean, you know, the Constitution of India, I've been just before we had this discussion, Manish, I actually was reading the Constitution of India. And the Constitution of India is very, very clear. In fact, what the government of India is doing is against its own constitution. So if a government allows itself to, you know, take the country to the point where it is losing that moral high ground for human rights, for democracy, for the rule of law, for fairness in investigations, for, you know, kind of impartiality, for all of those. If the government is actually losing that moral ground, then, you know, what is going to be the fate of the rest of the region? So unless you really say that, you know, this region is able to sort itself out in terms of democracy, in terms of human rights, other countries don't have, you know, a right to come and tell us, because we organize ourselves in a very democratic way, in a human rights friendly way. Unless you say that, then you cannot actually defend your kind of position as supporters of human rights. And India is losing that. I think it is also flouting their own constitution. Many countries in South Asia are looking to India, unfortunately. And when they see that, you know, India is flouting its own constitution, other governments in other parts of South Asia think that, you know, they are justified also, as we know, and I'm not going to name names just today, many of those countries are doing exactly the same. Uh, but that is really my position. In your second question, I do not actually know the details of what has happened. What I know is that when I was at Amnesty at that time, and I'm not talking on behalf of Amnesty, I'm just expressing my own kind of experience of this particular situation. At that time, there was an indication that, the government because Amnesty was saying that, we want to be closer to where human rights violations are taking place. Yeah. And the closer that you are, the closer you are to the people, then it's not like an organization that is talking to people from London. It is, talking to people from the countries in which they actually live. So at that time, but there was a problem with the Indian law, and they were saying that they were going to sort it out at that time. And that problem was with their, I don't know what the law actually is called, something to do with foreign contribution. And so they were saying at that time that Amnesty is not allowed to bring money from London to pay its staff in India. So you can only pay your staff in India if you raise the money from inside the country. But that really, my understanding, I could be wrong, but my understanding is that that was sorted out. They allowed Amnesty to take money from outside the country. But that was until, they were trying to bargain with Amnesty at that time. Unfortunately, Amnesty didn't accept that. So at that time, the impression that I had as an interested person, I wasn't part of any negotiation whatsoever, but the impression that I had as an employee of Amnesty was that things had got sorted out. But, this was the case, and there was no serious problem until Amnesty began to talk about issues that nobody else was able to talk about.
Can you list those issues? What were those issues related to India, which Amnesty was talking about?
Well, I mean, the kind of amendment to the Constitution which allowed certain people not to seek asylum in India, for example, that is one of them, and nobody else is, because when really you are a government that kind of don't bother too much about human rights, then journalists and media, of course, in India they are very brave and they are very robust, but at the same time they are under a huge amount of pressure. So it is left to an organization like Amnesty International to raise those issues. So there are many other issues. Amnesty, from the statement that Amnesty has issued, I found that they have been giving evidence to some other organizations, international hearings about what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir. Yeah. And Jammu and Kashmir, the government of India doesn't want anyone to talk about that. But a human rights organization cannot just keep quiet about that, because they have to actually discuss that. So, but that doesn't mean that, Amnesty or other human rights defenders who are talking about Kashmir, who are talking about the situation there, it doesn't mean that they agree with, violence taking place and they are supporting, any special movement. That is not the case. In fact, Amnesty doesn't support violence. Yeah. No human rights organization can support violence. But what they are saying is that, people should not be tortured. People should receive a fair trial if they are arrested. The fair trial should be based on, principles that Indian government, Indian state, if you like, because there's a difference between a state and government. A state is something that continues. Government is temporary, comes and goes. I mean, we don't know, after Modi, we don't know who is going to be the government in India. So governments are obliged to accept the commitments that have been made by the state. The state of India will continue. The state of Bangladesh will continue. The governments in Bangladesh and India, they come and go. So the government in any part of the world, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Burma, wherever you want to call it, the governments in these parts of the world, they are actually coming and going. And they are obliged to put into practice the commitments that the state has made. And the state of India has made a lot of commitments about human rights.
Can I just interrupt you there? So coming back to, the Indian legacy, I mean, you do know about Mahatma Gandhi and, the kind of stance he took even against the British government. And that was at a basic level, reciprocity of the goodness in the other person. So even though India was under imperialistic rule, Mahatma Gandhi in his whole life never made an allegation against the British based on those kind of, beliefs that they were the evil. In fact, he went out of his way and supported them from time to time. And so the Indian democracy is founded on those principles where the other is not seen as the problem. The problem is with the situation, with how things have been dealt with, or with the powers to be. And that Gandhian legacy was carried out by the Indian political leaders, and at least in the formative years, in the years of Nehru and so on and so forth. And then we had a very positive development from India in terms of non-aligned movement, which was there as the bedrock of Indian democracy, where it tried not to align with the overarching forces of capitalistic world, tried to create a neutral path. It succeeded or didn't succeed, that is not for me to say. Obviously India was also closely identified with Russia and so on and so forth. So there has been a certain kind of history, and Indian rights, Indian human rights movement has got that credence. The state and the religion are at, or at least till now, they were at arm's length. The state did not meddle in certain things, in certain situations. And you had some very strong civil rights institutions in India, which kind of continue to do the good work. But I do see that there is a certain amount of now a question mark, a threat. And it's also coming from grassroots levels journalists. A lot of them feel the heat, the amount of trolling which goes on in media in India whenever someone goes against the populist views is unprecedented. I mean, you have like an army of trolls which will take down anyone. So if you were to say something which is not in sync with what a certain section of society wants to hear, you definitely will be abused, and there's no law against that. So we are historically at odds, so you just can't raise your hand and stand up and say your views. You are almost subject to a mobocracy. Yeah? We will address these questions right after the break. We have a break coming up. Thank you so much. See you after the break. Hello, London. We're back. We're here with Abbas Faz, who has worked for 30 years with Amnesty International and now is a lecturer at Essex University. He teaches and works in the space of human rights. And as we discussed today, earlier in the show, we have a crisis, a huge global crisis. And before we went on the break, Abbas, I did talk about what's happening in India. I mean, the situation where you have a certain kind of mob taking over, which is kind of dangerous. And to be honest, no one wants to face that. You have everyone from the big actors like Shah Rukh Khan to, big journalists facing the heat. They say something and suddenly they have huge amount of abuse coming in terms of this digital trolling. And you're made to believe that there is a side, there is a vicious, vociferous, mob out there, which is there to get you, and you dare not cross the line, dare not say something which they don't want to hear. And on the other side, you also have these kind of forces in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, and in this whole kind of South Asian, if I can say, the quasi-democratic nation states we have. I mean, India, by at least so far, has managed to uphold, unless you count the few aberrations in the last few years of lynching and all those things which have happened. But by and large, there has been a balance, check and balance. But we do see increasingly in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, where suddenly the mobs have more power than ever. I mean, a mob dictates in Bangladesh who they want to punish and who they think has gone against the Sharia or the law or the Islamic State. And so it has happened in Pakistan, where they decide to do something and the state intervenes later. The state seems to be almost powerless. And how do you see, I mean, there's one issue where the governments are trying to control and nudge out someone like Amnesty International, which stands up for the weak, for the vulnerable, for the minority. But on the other hand, you have motivated mobs, which are kind of carrying out the act first, and the governments are literally powerless. I mean, how do you balance the situation? Where does, and that's where somewhere I think there's a bit of resentment against organizations like Amnesty International, because people stand up and say, hey, where were they when this was happening or that was happening? They didn't kind of, stand up or walk in there. But when we are doing this, then they stand up. So there's a little bit of that imbalance. There's a little bit of that kind of a sense of, justice, which they then try to inject into this whole thing, where also there's a sense of resentment against anyone which is, let's say, Western, based out of London or in the West, where they say, okay, these guys talk about human rights, but where were they when this happened historically? So there's that wrong sense of chronology being played out, where they're trying to put two and two together, but in a very misplaced sense of the situation, if you get what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely, Manish. You are absolutely putting your finger on a very, very important issue. I personally believe that it is important to bring any authority to account, to be able to question authorities who are taking a higher ground to, and ask them questions about their conducts. And really, I would be the first person to support anyone who wants to question the work that Amnesty International does. I think people should be able to do that. They should be able to, question the work that the government of India is doing, the government of Bangladesh is doing, the government of Pakistan, as you mentioned, all sorts of governments. We have seen the erosion of democracy in all countries of South Asia. Afghanistan is struggling with democracy, and we know that the Taliban are being supported by, outside powers, and they continue to be a problem in Afghanistan. We know that Pakistan is, the kind of army in Pakistan has a lot of kind of power, and there are allegations that it interferes with the political situation there. In Bangladesh, we have seen the erosion of democracy day by day and year by year. In Sri Lanka, we have a serious problem there. The only country that really at the moment, and also, in India, we were hoping that at least India would be holding up, some principles, saying that in the face of all these kind of, difficulties, in the problems that are developing in other countries, how they really, kind of turn their back on the achievements of their people, turn their back on democracy, on respect for human rights. At least India would not do that. So I personally thought that, India would be standing up against any effort to erode those principles. The only other country that really, and because I've been, closely engaged in the development of democracy and respect for human rights there, is the Maldives. It's a small country. For the time being, really, if you look at it, in the entire South Asia, we just have the Maldives. And it is caught in between two kind of regional powers. One is India and the other one is China. So both of those, they want to impose their system of not just the economic and global and trade system, but also they want to impose their political system on this country. And of course, China was doing that in the past. They've come to their senses now. India was supposed to be like the kind of, light of democracy in the region. It is losing its force. And Manish, it is very important for me to also mention this because when I've been talking to my other South Asian colleagues, they seem to not be fairly aware of this particular issue. The analysis that I get from places like, for example, Chatham House, all sorts of other organizations who are very seriously looking at the global power structure, the analysis that is coming out is really that the United States and the West are somehow becoming less powerful than they were in the past. So in a situation like that, it is very important this is important. Why is it important? It is important because we've got to understand that if we don't do anything to change the situation for, more respect for human rights in the countries of the region, other countries, even if they kind of, have the will, and there is a lot of suspicion that they may not even have the will. Even if they have the will, countries of the West, they will not be able to do anything. They will not be able to do anything for a number of reasons, because the West has no longer got that like kind of economic foothold in Asia. It has been replaced by another superpower, so kind of a nation superpower. There is this kind of policy of looking east, which means that we kind of open up to you, China. And if if we open up to you, it's got, for governments in South Asia especially, if we open up to you, China, then there's a lot of advantage for us. One advantage is that we can do whatever we want. We can just, forget about our constitutions, forget about human rights, just, kind of repeat prescription of exactly what you are doing in your country. Because you're financially, economically successful, that's all that matters to us. It doesn't matter that you've got such a lot of kind of corruption going on. It doesn't matter that you don't have the rule of law. It doesn't matter that there's no freedom of expression in your country. We are very happy to, follow all of that. And that is what is happening. So it is very important for us to actually know that really we are only on our own in Eastern countries, especially in the countries of South Asia. There's no one to support. We cannot expect support from India, because if they are really doing what they are doing now with an organization like Amnesty, how are they supposed to, how can you expect them to do anything, in support of any other human rights defender? Western countries won't be able to support, because one reason why Trump is so kind of inward looking is not just because suddenly he is. I have a lot of reservation or serious concerns about some of the statements that Trump has made, but it's an indication of what the country is feeling at the moment. It is the fact that the country is feeling that they are losing their power globally, so they are trying to kind of strengthen, and that is not going to work anyway, strengthen themselves, kind of internally. So that is what I'm trying to say. The assumption that, kind of there is a fight against the Western countries now, this is also a misplaced one. Another issue is that development, Manish, if you do stop me if I'm talking too much.
No.
The other one is the development of what people call populism. Populism is what we've got in Hungary, what we've got in North Korea, what we've got in Iran, what we've got in what we had in Britain, during the Brexit period. The way that, for example, Boris Johnson was saying, we are going to save our country from the clutches of the European Union courts, for example. So this is populism, and that populism has been always the case in the countries of South Asia, but now it is even actually more so. So we were hoping that at least a country like India would not be succumbing to that, and I don't believe that it will be long term. I think the essence of India is democracy. As I said, the state stays on, the governments come and go. So I still have a lot of hope for India.
No, thank you so much. I think you made very, very important points. And thank you for your optimism as well, that we need to see India as a resilient democratic nation for the whole region, for the region's stability. And also what you pointed out, what's happening with China. I mean, there's this whole kind of pandering to the Chinese money, because it makes the government bring in some money, makes them look that they're doing something for the betterment of the economics of the country. But in effect, what they're trying to pander to is a rogue nation. I mean, I'm using a very strong word here, but the Chinese policies has almost kind of subverted itself to supplying money with one hand and taking the country in its grip with the other hand. So it's very dangerous. It's far more dangerous than what we had in the old days of Cold War with Soviet Russia. And I don't think the governments have been clearly able to see that, other than using it for their own agenda, like Trump has done that, calling the virus China virus. I mean, that kind of, again, a very populist kind of subversion of the fact. But there is a real and grave danger with China, with its influence in countries of Africa. You said Maldives, but also in closer in the subcontinent, Pakistan, where again Imran Khan has overtly kind of supported the Chinese regime, but played down what has happened with the Uyghur Muslims, for instance. And somewhere, like, we see that kind of narrative, which is supported again by the media. So the media also has been kind of taken over. It's playing, what the government is saying is playing second fiddle to it. And we have a serious risk. And now when you see what happened in France and the response from, some of the people in Pakistan, it's again I'm not saying they're not supposed to respond, but the kind of responses we're seeing is very populist and veering towards a dangerous nation state, which is capable of saying and doing things which goes against the ethos of a democratic, open society. So you have all this real risk emerging. I'm going to address the elephant in the room, which is basically a lot of the situations seem to be coming from the fear of, what has happened in France. Like, you have this person who goes against the nation state policy of liberal and kind of, right to express themselves, whether it goes against a certain religious institution. So they would do that against any church, and in this particular instance, it went against the Muslim church. So there is this whole kind of basic conflict which is happening, which we have seen here in most of the Western countries. And the way to address, I mean, Britain has addressed it in a very, I would say, successful way, because multiculturalism, unlike in many other places, has been reasonably successful in the United Kingdom. Over the period of time, it has kind of created that dialogue. In spite of a few instances of whatever you call it, there has been a reasonable dialogue You don't see that kind of antagonism here. Muslims in every part of life here in the UK are very much enshrined there in the Conservative Party, in the Labour Party, and everywhere else. And they have a voice. And I don't think there is any systematic erosion of their rights, possibly. However, we do see some kind of themes emerging wherein there is a conflict. One of the conflicts has been with Amnesty International, where Geeta Sehgal, who resigned, I think last year, based on the fact that Amnesty was not heeding to her views and was playing, I think if I'm getting the name right, Beg, who was there in Guantanamo Bay and who was supported by Amnesty and who kind of very fairly talked about what the American government was doing to inmates in Guantanamo Bay, but went a bit ahead wherein he was pushing his jihadist ideology and was kind of misogynistic in his views and was very openly against women. And Amnesty kind of accepted his views, or kind of was seen to be kind of playing it forward. And Geeta Sehgal, who is renowned kind of human rights activist, has been with Amnesty for many years, has got a lot of credentials because she worked with the Southall Black Sisters as well in the past, and actually is the daughter of Nayantara Sehgal, who was the sister of the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. So you have this kind of conflict coming up in an organization like Amnesty, here in the heart of the Western democracy, here in London, of all places. And you have this kind of very conflicting view emerging, which makes me question that is there something gone wrong? Is the Western liberal stance somewhere slightly subverted, or is not able to call a spade, or has kind of been compromised in some way, wherein on one hand they definitely want to support the weak and the vulnerable, and very commendable for that stance, and we all need to support it all out, but somewhere they're getting this kind of state of confusion where they have to accept someone who seems to uphold jihadist views as panacea to the Western problem. So what do you think? Where are we? Is something not going right?
Absolutely, Manish. I think that episode is a scar on the conscience of Amnesty, on the conscience of a lot of us who were working with Amnesty at that time. And I do feel that, Amnesty did not actually deal with the issues that Geeta Sehgal was raising at that time. And I do feel that, that was a shortcoming on behalf of Amnesty. And that shortcoming was kind of, it was at the time when the structures of the organization had been reshaped by the then Secretary General. I mean, the episode actually took place after she left. But the then Secretary General of Amnesty, just before Geeta left, was very kind of, she had her own style of organizational management, and that didn't really help a huge amount to kind of deal with issues like that. I mentioned earlier, I think it is good to be able to actually go inside Amnesty and see what is going on, because it is part of our struggle for human rights, and it is part of our struggle to know what the human rights organizations are doing. It's not just the issue of, for example, in the past, we have had investigation into the activities of human rights organizations in other parts of the world. So, and some people, from those organizations have been placed under investigation. I think it is important not to see, maybe one of the, kind of assumptions that we as thinking Eastern people, thinking people have had, is that, these organizations should be considered beyond flaws. And I don't think that is a good attitude. I think we've got to be able to actually criticize ourselves.
Yep.
We've got to be able to criticize other people. You know, I mean, I've been telling, you know, my students that really, you know, the first person that you've got to criticize is your lecturer. Am I actually giving you what you need to know? And, you know, that sort of thing. So it is good. And I think, you know, the very fact. Now, let me just say something.
Yeah.
Amnesty is kind of, you know, like any other institution, like any other organization, like any other government, if you like any other, you know, grouping, it is a balance of, you know, so many different forces, so many different attitudes, so many different expectations, and so many different approaches. There are people who, you know, kind of consider, you know, kind of Western principles to be supreme. There are people who actually are completely opposed to that. And that is great because, you know, an organization that has that level of interaction. There are also people who, for example, you know, I remember years ago, many years ago, this is like kind of 25 years ago, I took a film crew with myself to Pakistan, and then I went to Afghanistan. At that time, I was working on those two countries. So the idea was to investigate the human rights situation there. And I had a very young, very English, if you like, cameraman with me. And he was fascinated by, you know, kind of the, he was really fascinated by what the Taliban were doing. And I just asked him, I said, look, you know, I'm not trying to stop you. It is great that you are fascinated by, you know, the kind of material that you're dealing with. But can I ask you why you're so fascinated? And then immediately he said, look, this is pure Islam.
Yeah.
As if, you know, as if Islam is like kind of, you know, something that, I mean, pure Islam is like kind of, you know, that is a very strange approach by this person to a situation. So to him, you know, he just was equating Islam with what the Taliban were doing. Whereas we know that, you know, I mean, Islam is really an interpretation that many different Muslims have. So what interpretation of Islam are you going to accept? Is that the interpretation, for example, that exists in Bangladesh, or is it the one that exists in Pakistan, for example, or is it the one that exists in Malaysia, in Indonesia,
or from the Sufi learnings, which has been, prevalent in certain parts of South Asia as well. Yeah.
So, I mean, these are all the different type of investigation, the different type of kind of, the different type of interpretations. And unless one knows about these things, people think that, you know, Islam is just one thing.
So there's a lot of misinformation, miseducation, and stereotyping, which is prevalent in media.
At that time, unfortunately, someone who was in a higher position at Amnesty developed the idea of a defensive jihad. And that didn't go down well with many people in the organization. From what I understand, was that he actually retracted that. But, you know, it is something, I'm just trying to say that, you know, it is good that we know about these kind of, you know, tensions within these organizations, because then we can actually contribute. We know, you know, which part of the organization is that part that we want it to develop, and which part is the part that we don't want it to develop. And that is in every society. In societies, there are forces, there are, you know, kind of, there are racist groups, there are, you know, also groups that are defenders of human rights. So, I mean, you know, it depends, you know, which one do we want to really kind of associate ourselves with. So, in a way, I don't think it is I don't think it is right to kind of see Amnesty as just one single entity.
Yeah.
Amnesty is a combination of many different forces. Let's hope. And one reason why we were, thinking of, at that time, I was part of the process, of really moving Amnesty to Asia. So the Asian Department of Amnesty should move to Asia. The African Department of Amnesty should move to Africa because of all of these things. Because, so that the people who are working at the in the organization, they are exposed to people who are actually in the field, to the views, to understanding, to interpretations, and all of that.
Very important point, Abbas. But we're coming to closure. I think I'm getting the signal that we are running out of time. So let me again say it was such a pleasure to speak to you. And I wish there were more people like you. I truly wish that there were more people like you who took upon important issues and causes like human rights. Unfortunately, in our striving towards material welfare, and even in South Asia and many parts of the world which are relatively poor, there's a whole emphasis on doing things which are economically viable, and there's not enough movement, not enough kind of, I would say, impetus to learn, study, and kind of, sow the seeds and kind of lay the foundation of a better society. That's something which has been, in a way, societies have ignored, and the political forces have kind of taken advantage of that, where a lot of political forces are emanating from strata of society which is not well informed, well educated, and we have a situation. And here in the United Kingdom, like you said, what happened during Brexit, it's if I could say that in hindsight, it was people's fears playing up and down and making them motivated, and some smart captioning and advertising could motivate and bring the fear in them and make certain calls. So without being judgmental about it, we do have as a society to place a higher emphasis on social and fundamental values. One of the most fundamental rights which we as human beings have, human rights and the right to express freely and to have our own belief and to live in accordance with that peacefully with others. So that is something very, very fundamental to every healthy society, on which you then can build a sustainable and long-term economically viable society. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and welcome again to the Manish Tiwari Show. Hope to see you in future. Thank you. And thanks, London,
Thank you
for
very
being
much,
here.
Manish. It has been a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. All right, viewers. So here was the first opening episode of the Manish Tiwari Show. We'll be here again every Saturday. See you again soon. Bye.